me all the keys, I'm about to unlock. Give me all the keys, I'm about to unlock. Give me all the keys, I'm about to unlock. Give me all the keys, I'm about to unlock. Yep. Got some yup. All right. I'm only going to start when I feel ready. And I just took a sip out of the Yeti. And I think I feel ready. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to it. What up? This is podcast 17. This is Give Me the Keys. Welcome back if you've been listening. And if you're new, welcome to the podcast. This is my podcast. I'm the host. I'm the only guy in the room, as you can see. And this is my pod. And today, let's just cut some corners. Let's get into it. Today we're talking about personality. And personality is something I've been pretty interested in for a while. I guess since I started college, personality tests have kind of come across my radar, and I really enjoy listening to lectures on YouTube about personality, about what they signify, about what they reveal about us as individuals, about our ways of being. So personality has always been something that I'm really interested in. You know, I've read a lot about it. I've listened a lot about it. And I have personality. So I understand personality pretty well. But today, I ran a poll on my Instagram. If you're not on the Instagram, I'll put the link right here or something. Probably won't. But I ran a poll on Instagram. I always want to get feedback from my audience. I always want to get input. So the Instagram is just the easiest way to get that. And people want to know about personality. And I'm here to deliver this message to you. So let's get into it. So today, as I do, as people of this, listeners of this podcast will know, I do show notes. So this is an example of what a show note looks like. It's just an outline, and today we're talking about personality. So first off, what exactly is personality? I think the best definition for it is personality is individual patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So it's distinct to every person, because every person has a different pattern, a different way they process information that leads to different outcomes in thinking, feeling, and behaving. So personality is not fixed. It changes a lot depending on context. It changes a lot depending on stimulus, outside stimulus, on setting, on so many factors. I mean, your day-to-day health, your life stage, all these things impact your personality, and your personality fluctuates across time. So it's not this fixed in time type thing. Your personality evolves. And just to give a brief outline of today, is we're going to talk about, one, what is personality, which I just went over. We're going to get into the types of tests that reveal what type of personality you have, or can provide some indicators on what aspects of your personality are strongest and weakest inside yourself. And then I'm going to narrow down to one singular personality test called the Big Five. I'm going to explain that in detail. And then I'll go over what my scores are. I have two sets of scores from 2021, early on in 2021. I have a more recent one from 2024 this year, so very recent. I'll go over those scores, and then I have a few friends, very close people in my life, that have also taken this test because I've encouraged them to or asked them to. And so I also have 3 other data sets from 3 other people in my life. And I've come up with some funny names for these 3 people. They're aliases. I think that's the right word. So we're going to have Old Alec, From 2021, we'll have new Alec from the now 2024, and then we'll have Uncle Greg. We know Uncle Greg scores, and then we have Clayjean. That's Clayjean. Clayjean. We have Clayjean scores too, and then we have AG's score. So we have 5 sets of data points where we can kind of talk about this on a grand scheme, because I don't want to be too narrow. What's my personality? I want to actually encapsulate different types of personalities across the spectrum, and then just go over what that means. So that's where the podcast is heading, just to give a brief intro overview, and that's where we're starting. But for now, let me chill here. Let me take a little interlude, a little break, we'll call it. And this is kind of where I just reorient. I've been sweating, as you can see. I just came from the gym. I got on the Norman's Rare Guitar tees, and this is from LA. Shout out Norman and his rare findings of instruments. I like that the camera set up to where this shelf, you can't see what's on it. It's like a little what's he got type thing. But I know what I need. First off, chapstick. I mean, I was out hiking yesterday, and my lips were chapping up. So I'll put this on, getting the cracks. I like to do that. And then, what else we got? Nothing crazy today, I should say. But this is cool. I got a Yeti, and I've had this for a long, long time. And I just started drinking out of it this week, which is odd. But I got some ice cold water in here. So got to stay hydrated. Remember, drink water. It's very important that you take care of your body. I don't even know what I'm saying. But I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we'll get into the podcast. Yep. Oh, yeah, and you hear that. That is the sound of H2O. And I think a little bit of my breath. I think you could see my breath. That's how cold that water was. Ice cold, snow cold, barely even unfrozen. All right, so back to the show notes. Let's get into it. Eight minutes in, let's go. So I've already covered what is personality. I think we have a good understanding. It's a pretty simple concept. It's who you are. It's how you interact with the world. It's how you think, feel, and behave. Cool. So what are the types of tests that you can figure out your personality? Because personality is kind of abstract. You need to have some sort of proper measurement to know what your personality is. The most common types of personality tests are the Myers-Briggs, the DISC assessment, the Enneagram, and the Big Five. Those are kind of the main 4. In Myers-Briggs, that's like INTJ, XYZ, whatever. I don't like the Myers-Briggs that much. That's the one they use in college a lot. That was kind of one of the most early on popular tests, but if you actually look at the literature and you do some research, Myers-Briggs is not that good of a indicator of personality. So we'll write off Myers-Briggs. See ya. The next one is the DISC. Hate the DISC. I don't like the DISC assessment. It's not accurate. They used that at my, when I was an accountant, they used that at my workplace. And it was just so useless. Like the data didn't inform me on anything really, on like how I could potentially act or what I should do differently or how. It really provided nothing. So I don't like the DISC either. Also, the DISC was used when I moved into sales. Our team did like a DISC assessment to see if you were a good fit for direct sales, if you had the right personality and the right way about you to go knock on some doors. And I think my score, it was on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 was, you're going to be crushing it, buddy. You're a great salesman. You're going to crush. A 10 was great. And then a 1 was horrible. And I got a 1. The DISC assessment said you got a 1 on this future work thing, and here I am 3 years later. The DISC is wrong. So, frick the Myers-Briggs, frick the DISC. The other two, the big five and the Enneagram, these are the two that I like, the two that are actually grounded in science, grounded in psychology, grounded in social science, grounded in actual literature and test to see if they're valid. So the big five and the Enneagram are the best ones. I'll cover the Enneagram super quick. Enneagram is nice because it breaks it up into 9 types. There's 1 through 9, they're all numbered. And each type, it speaks to your where you get your instinct from, whether it's in the head, the gut, or the heart. I think it's the heart. But the 9 types are broken up into 3 subgroups of head, heart, gut, where you feel and think from most often. And it's 9 different types, and it speaks to your key motivators, like your North Star of motivation, what actually drives you to act the way you do. And then it pins that against your greatest fear, the thing that you want to move away from. And there's 9 of those. And I think that's right, because I think, it doesn't make sense that there's infinite numbers of personalities, but we need these scales to create these tests. And key factors of motivation and fear are really important to the Enneagram. So I've taken the Enneagram lots of times, and I am a type 5. And if you go read that, or the test well, I'm a type 5. I'm a type 5. But anywho, today what I want to focus on, what we will focus on together, is the Big 5. Big 5's the best one. The Big 5 personality test is hands down the most valid. And there's a lot of research and literature to back that up. I'm not just saying it. It's actually used in clinical psychology. The Enneagram is also used in therapy, in clinical settings, things like that. But what I want to focus on today, and what we will focus on together, is the Big 5. And so I want to point you guys to this, I want to point you guys directly to the resource that I use to take the Big 5 test if you're interested in taking it. The website, maybe I can put it right here. The website's called understandmyself.com. It was actually created by Jordan Peterson and his team when he was a professor at Toronto. I believe that was the era it was created. But he put together this test. It's backed by science. And like I've said already, it's a really good test. And I think it's only $10 to get your results, which is very affordable, and it's extremely valuable. So if you want to check out what your Big 5s are, you can go to understandmyself.com. I don't have a promo code. I'm just pointing people there, and if you spend money on it, that's your choice. That's your financial choice. So the Big 5. So what are the Big 5? What are these Big 5 traits? The Big 5 are agreeableness, extroversion, conscientiousness, openness, and neuroticism. And I believe I think it's called an acronym. Could be wrong. But the acronym is OCEAN for the Big 5. So OCEAN, O for openness, E for extroversion, A for agreeableness. I think I'm spelling ocean wrong. I am. Anyways, whatever. Agreeableness, extroversion, conscientiousness, openness, neuroticism. Those are the Big 5. So let's run through what those. So those are the Big 5, and the Big 5 break down into, each section breaks down into 2 subgroups. So really there's 10 total. So for example, agreeableness breaks down into politeness and compassion. Politeness and compassion. And so I know these pretty well, but I am also, check this out, whipping out the iPad. Swing. I also have the my Big 5 aspects right here in front of me. But I know these pretty well, and I'm going to basically speak from memory and speak from heart. But so let's go over which is which. And just to give examples, we're going to run through what my scores are, my most recent scores, and I will, as we run through the big 5 traits, I will, I'm not going to read directly from this, but I'll be pulling from this to help illuminate the what each trait signifies in the big 5. So let's get into that. Let's keep it moving along quickly. So agreeableness is the first trait on here. And all of these traits in the big 5 are based on a percentile grade. So it's out of 100 people, a percentile is analogous to having 100 people in a room. And you're going to figure out based on your percentile where you rank among those hundreds of people. You're going to know where you sit in regard to the mean. You're going to know where you sit in regard to the average. And you're going to be able to pick out where you fall in the uniqueness, the distinct parts where you're either really high or really low. The mean is always around 40 to 60, give or take 5. But these scores are based on a percentile. So for example, in agreeableness, I'm really low. I'm in the 13th percentile. So the way that you can conceptualize what that means, if I'm in the 13th percentile in agreeableness, is if I were one of 100 people in a room, I would be lower in agreeableness than 86 of them, and higher in agreeableness than 13 of them. So, if that makes sense. I mean, these are numbers, but that's a percentile. Percentiles are pretty easy to understand. Hopefully I explained that well enough, but I'm low in agreeableness. So I am in the 13th percentile. So I'm not very agreeable. And just so people know what is agreeableness, well, obviously, agreeableness is going to be how likely you are to speak up for yourself. Agreeableness is going to signify how much value you put on being altruistic, how much value you put on being kind and nice, how much value you put on pleasing, thinking about other people, putting other people first. More disagreeable people are going to be pretty competitive. They're going to be not afraid of conflict. They are more likely to engage in controversial conversations or topics or bring things up to people. So these are the differences of agreeableness. So when I see my score is low, when I see that I'm 13 in agreeableness, that is pretty telling. And it makes sense given my occupation. I knock on doors for a living. And to go knock on someone's door, you gotta be pretty disagreeable, because a very agreeable person is going to be way more weighted towards compassion and kindness, and it's impolite to interrupt someone's day. So of someone who's very high in agreeableness, like over the 80th percentile, it's going to be pretty hard for them to work in an occupation like direct sales. So that right there, that's an example of how these traits actually apply to real life. Your personality is going to play out in multiple domains across your life. It's going to play out in your work. It's going to play out in your relationships. It's going to play out in what you do in your free time. It's going to play out in what your apartment or your house or your living space looks like. It actually explains a lot of why our lives are made up the way they are. So I'm low in agreeableness. And another aspect of this, as I move into the big 5, we're on agreeableness right now, but as I move through, is I think it's kind of cool that I've taken this test twice over time. So like I said, I took this big 5 test in 2021. Early on in 2021, my life was very different. I was still basically an accountant at that point. My life was extremely different when I took this 3 years ago. And then I have the results from like a week ago. So I have the most recent results. And so it's really cool to me to see how my personality has shifted over time. And so, for example, in 2021, I was 32nd percentile in agreeableness. So I was still pretty low. I was 32nd percentile. But over those 3 years, I've dropped down to 13. And that's a massive drop. If you think about it in the terms of the percentile, 13 is less than half of 32. So it's like becoming twice as disagreeable. if that makes sense. So that's a big drop, and based on how my life has changed in regards to my work, it makes sense that I'm more disagreeable. It makes more sense. Given, like I said, my profession, given that I've matured, and also I think it's just in my nature to be very competitive and to be unconventional and bring things up to people. I have no problem. I mean, this podcast is a good example. I'm disagreeable. I'm going to say what I think. And I don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily bother me if someone on the other end of this hears this and they feel negative. You know, if it hurts someone's feelings or it turns someone off, I don't really care. So that's helped me and enabled me to do this podcast, is I just don't care. Now, keep in mind here, this is also important to know, is it's important to think about the relationship of all 5 traits. So, for example, if someone's really low in agreeableness, but they're really high in a trait like neuroticism, which I'll get to what neuroticism is. Neuroticism is basically negative emotion. So if someone's very disagreeable and they're also highly neurotic, they're also highly full of negative emotion, that person's going to suck to be around because they're going to be basically pissing people off. They're going to be transmitting their negative emotion to other people. They're going to be a tyrant. They're going to just be a pain in your ass, basically, for lack of a better term. So it's important to think about all 5 in congruence in relation to the other traits. So keep that in mind. So I am very disagreeable, and I think it allows me to, 1, be extremely blunt with people, be very honest with people. I think it allows me to not be taken advantage of. I can actually speak my mind. Like, for example, if you're at a restaurant and your order comes out, something's wrong, I have no problem bringing it up and say, hey, make this right, buddy. And you guys can go back and listen to Pod 9. That's probably the most disagreeable podcast I've ever done. Pod 9. I'm going to keep plugging Pod 9 in the Gimme the Keys series podcast because Pod 9's my favorite one. Gosh, it's so funny and it's so real and raw. Anyways, I'm going to bring that up to the server. Hey, this isn't right. I'm disagreeing, and will you please make this right? Being disagreeable doesn't mean you're a jerk. It just means that you're willing to engage in conflict or step on someone else's toes. So like, for example, in agreeableness, so Aji, one of the other people on here, Aji, she's 50 in agreeableness. So she's much higher she's way more agreeable than I am. So if I'm 13 and she's 50, she's like almost, she's about 4 times more agreeable than I am. And she's a lot less likely at a restaurant, if her order comes out wrong, she's a lot less likely to bring it up or say anything or demand a refund or change of order. So that's an example of where, this big 5, it really is very rooted in context and rooted in other people. So the fact that me and Aji, we're a partnership, it's nice that I'm disagreeable and she's more agreeable. It's good to have that variety. That's where the that saying opposites attract, or I think that's the saying, is important, because as a unit, if you're in a partnership with somebody and you're a unit, you're more well-rounded. If one of you is one end of the spectrum on one trait and one end of the spectrum on the same trait, that's more you're more diverse and you're able to fortify through more life together. So all these traits really play out in work, relationships, friendships, how you live, how you carry yourself. So that's agreeableness. That's the one of the 5 big 5. The next one is extroversion. Extroversion is pretty self-explanatory. We know about introversion and extroversion. It's basically a scale on how extroverted you are. And if somebody's really high in extroversion, you can imagine they're going to be very outgoing. They're going to be very sociable. They're going to enjoy social interactions. They're going to enjoy they're going to get energy from other people. They're going to want to be around people a lot more if they're very extroverted. The inverse of that is introversion. As you know, somebody that's a bookworm, that likes to be alone, that likes to keep quiet, that's kind of shy, that's kind of timid, that's kind of in the corner of the classroom, or, you can imagine an introvert, right? So introversion is that. And so my score from 2021 on the scale of extroversion versus introversion is I was 47 in extroversion. So the scale is on extroversion. So if you're a 1 in extroversion, you're very introverted. If you're 100 in extroversion, you're extremely extroverted. So I'm smack dab in the middle at 47 when I took it in 2021, which I feel like is accurate. I feel like early on in my life, I was very introverted. And then throughout middle school and high school, I kind of learned extroversion. I think extroversion is something that most people have to learn. And so it makes sense while I'm balanced out right at 47. And then when I took the test the second time, I scored 50. So I'm dead smack in the middle, 50 right now on extroversion. And I think, I'm biased, but I think that's the perfect place to be. You should be able to be extroverted when the scenario presents itself to be extroverted. And you should also be able to be okay being alone. You shouldn't be too dependent on other people. You should be self-sufficient to some extent, And so I believe that it's better to be balanced on extroversion. Let's look at some other scores. So this is interesting. Uncle Greg and Clayjon, they both scored a 16 in extroversion. So they're pretty low in extroversion. They're introverts. So Uncle Greg and Clayjon are down there at the bottom of the scale of extroversion. And what does that mean for them? Well, it means that they're probably going to have to charge their battery. Their social battery needs to be charged more often than somebody that's higher in extroversion. They're most likely going to look forward to time alone. They're most likely going to feel the most safe and comfortable when they're alone. And they're most likely going to have more negative emotions surrounding parties, dinners, hangouts, game nights. They're not going to really be crazy about those things. So, and then the other score, AG, she's an 89 in extroversion. So I'm 50 in extroversion. She's 89. She's almost twice as extroverted as me. And that makes a lot of sense because she wants to spend time together. She wants to host people at her place. She wants to, engage with friends, have big social groups. And that's great. And that's cool that she's so extroverted and that I'm kind of baseline in the middle. I think in a partnership, it's good when, like I've said, there's a discrepancy in the trait because you're more well-rounded as a unit. So that's extroversion. That's the E in the ocean on the big five. Okay? Next trait. Let's get into this one. It's a C. It's a conscientiousness. And that's a tricky word. It's spelled conscientiousness, but it's conscientiousness. And this is not consciousness. It's a different word. So there's conscientiousness and there's consciousness. Consciousness is like being aware. Like I'm conscious right now. I'm looking around. I see the Colorado flag. I see the globe. That's being conscious. This is not that. Conscientiousness is a big five aspect that has to do with orderliness. It has to do with industriousness. It has to do with how hardworking you are. It has to do with how determined you are to meet your goals. It has to do with how much you clean up in your apartment. It has to do with how well you maintain social contracts. Conscientiousness is a very, very important trait because it's the most correlated to predict life success over time. So conscientiousness is a good trait. It's a good trait. It's an objectively good trait. Whereas agreeableness, like we've talked about, being low in agreeableness isn't necessarily bad. Being super high in agreeableness is not necessarily good. There's a trade-off. And like it said, it depends on these contexts. So agreeableness is one of those traits that it's not objectively good or bad. It's dependent on social factors and it's dependent on a lot of other things. Extroversion is very similar to agreeableness, where extroversion it's not exactly objectively good or bad trait, Again, because it's it has to do with interacting socially, it depends on context. However, conscientiousness is an objectively good trait because it will predict your life success. The higher you are in conscientiousness, the higher likelihood that you will be successful in life. And success is a pretty hard thing to determine. It's kind of an abstract thing. What is success? Well, it depends on what you're measuring that against. It depends on what country you live in, etc. So conscientiousness is a good trait. You want to be high in conscientiousness. So when I took it in 2021, I was 63. So if I was in a room of 100 people, I would be more conscientious than 63 of the people. Yeah. I'd be more conscientious than most of the people in the room. I'd be more orderly and hardworking than majority of the room in 2021. Now, I took this 2 weeks ago, and my conscientious score was an 80. So I've gone up in conscientiousness since 2021. And I think that's correct. Because one, I think maturing. There's been some data that shows across time people become more conscientious. So it's not the most shocking news to hear that I got more conscientious. I think I had to with my, again, changing career, with moving around more, becoming more social, more intertwined in social groups, valuing socialization more, valuing friendship, valuing my family. Conscientious people, one of the marquee traits is that they are very good at maintaining social contracts across time. And also, the two traits that conscientiousness breaks down into, they're going to be, conscientiousness breaks down into industriousness, which is a fancy word for how hardworking you are in school and administrative and managerial positions. So the other sub-trait of conscientiousness is orderliness, and I'm in the 80th percentile for orderliness. So I'm more orderly than most people. And if I was in a room of 100 people, only 19 of those people would be more orderly than me. So the other thing about orderliness is I think this is really unique, is that it's related to disgust sensitivity. So how sensitive you are to disgust. So I'll read a little bit here. It says, highly orderly people tend to be disturbed and disgusted by mess and chaos. They keep everything tidy and organized. They tend to think in more black and white terms. Things are good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable. They like to stick to schedules. They want everything to be where it should be and stay where it belongs. They're detailed oriented. They are rule abiding and tend to insist that rules are observed. They can be judgmental towards themselves and others if and when rules are broken and ignored. So that's that. So the other thing is, so men tend to be lower in conscientiousness than women. So the mean percentile for women in the general population is 54.5. For men, the mean is 45. So women, this is unique. Women tend to be more conscientious, detailed oriented, orderly than men. Good to know that on average, right? So I'm in the 80th percentile. And I'm grateful for that. What are some other scores on here? So Uncle Greg's 28. He's not that conscientious. He's not that goal-oriented. He's not, he's not that orderly. And then Clayjon, poor Clayjon, he's 20. So he's 20 in conscientiousness. And same thing as Uncle Greg. He's not that hardworking. He doesn't do as well at being consistent and disciplined and striving forward across time. He's going up and down. He's probably not cleaning his room as much. And it's important for those guys to know that they're low in conscientiousness, because you can influence it. You can become more disciplined, more regimented, more oriented towards detail. It's a matter of focus, though, and discipline, and it takes time and effort. And then Aji, she's 69 in conscientiousness. It's pretty conscientious. That's pretty good. So that's conscientiousness. Let's keep it rolling. The next trait. This is my favorite trait. This is openness. And openness is gonna be how creative you are. Openness is the main predictor of creativity in the Big Five. Openness. It's how willing you are to think abstractly. It's how willing you are to ponder philosophical ideas. It's how intelligent you are. Openness is related to creativity and IQ. So those are two pretty big factors. IQ is probably the most studied personality. It's not really personality, but it's the most social measurement that has been the most thoroughly studied and backed by research and such. So openness relates to creativity and IQ. Openness is an objectively good trait, and it's the most fixed trait. So you can't really adjust how creative you are and how smart you are at an IQ level. It's a very difficult trait to influence. So what you get is what you got, and that's just kind of what it is. And it can be influenced to a small degree, but not as much as a trait like agreeableness. You can really, really, influence agreeableness with careful, intentional action. Openness, it's creativity and IQ. You can't just become more creative. It's innate. It's inherent to who you are. It's in your nature. It's in your DNA, son. So let's look at openness here. Get back out the iPad Pro. And openness. We'll see here. And so when I took the test back in 2021, I was a 64, decently high. When I took it 2 weeks ago, I'm now 71 in openness. 71's pretty good. It's moderately high. I'm not exceptionally high, but I'm moderately high in openness. So let's read a little bit about openness and what it really means. People who are moderately high in openness are more likely than average to be characterized by others as smart, creative, exploratory, intelligent, and visionary. They tend to be more interested in learning and in acquiring new abilities and skills. They're curious. They find themselves interested in abstract thinking, philosophy, and meaning of belief systems and ideologies. They attend cultural events such as movies, concerts, plays, poetry, readings, art shows, and they're likely to enjoy writing. They enjoy complex, abstract ideas more than the average person, and they like to confront and solve problems, especially if high in conscientiousness. So, like I've noted before, these traits work in tandem. So because I'm very high in conscientiousness and I'm also super open, I'm moderately high in openness, because I have that pairing of conscientiousness and openness, That's an incredible duality. And I'm grateful and I'm blessed and I don't take any credit for it. I give all the credit to God. I think I've become this way because it's in my nature. And it's for example, if someone's very conscientious, but they're really low in openness, they're going to get things done, but it's going to be more kind of in the confines of a standardized workplace. The fact that I'm extremely open to concepts and ideas and I value them, and I'm also pretty conscientious, I'm going to aim at some pretty abstract goals. And because I'm disagreeable, I'm also going to pretty much not let anyone stop me. Hence the podcast, right? Makes more sense, huh? So, where's it talk about creativity and so people high in openness, they're more adaptable. They are creative thinkers. They tend to shake things up a bit, particularly if they're also disagreeable. And they may be attracted to more revolutionary ideas, particularly if high in conscientiousness. Actually, that says below average in conscience. So that's interesting. Let me make this correction here. It says people who are high in openness may be attracted to more revolutionary ideas, particularly if they're below average in conscientiousness. So maybe conscientiousness kind of levels out how practical the goal is. Because if you're not conscientious, if you're not very hardworking, you're going to be way more attracted to some like crazy idea that's revolutionary because you're less tuned to the actual practical path of getting there. That's unique. That's cool. Didn't know that. So openness. I'm a 71. Uncle Greg, he's a 57, above average. Clay Jean, he's a 61. He's above average. And Aji, get this, Aji is a 97 in openness. 97 percentile. In a room of 100 people, only 3 more are going to be as smart and creative as Aji. Wow. Crazy, right? So that's a good trait. The other thing that I want to outline about these scores on the Big Five. So as I mentioned, the 5 break down into 2 subcategories. So there's really 10. And the really interesting traits when you get your scores back, the really notable things are going to be where you're an outlier, where you're extremely high or extremely low. That's going to be more data. That's going to be more telling for your distinct personality, right? Because we're all alike. We're all more alike than we are different, right? So you want to figure out the things that you're, most unique about you. So the percentiles where you're really low or really high are what's like very telling. And with that being said, while I have this pulled up here, so openness breaks down into intellect. That's one of the subcategories. And then there is aesthetics. So openness branches off into aesthetics and intellect. And the one that I'm pretty daggone high in that I have here available is I'm in the 87th percentile for aesthetics. So this was news to me when I got it. I was like, So I'm 87th percentile. I'm very high in aesthetics. And I want to read this little bit here about this. So generally speaking, a person's aesthetic score reflects their creativity. People who are high in aesthetics love beauty. They need an outlet for the creative ability, or they have difficulty thriving. I think about how I used to be an accountant and how I felt lifeless. They want to be surrounded by art or beautiful crafts. I just dropped a couple bands on some art. This is accurate. They're sensitive to color and architectural form. I wanted to study architecture originally, but I changed it because I got programmed by society and I picked something stable and boring. They like to collect things. They're imaginative. They like to daydream. They like to reflect on things. They're affected comparatively deeply by music, often of many genres, and may be musical or artistic themselves. They can get thoroughly immersed in a book. I've read a couple books. Or they can get immersed in their own thoughts and become somewhat oblivious to the outside world. Oopsie, been there, done that. They respond strongly to beauty, creativity, and art. And I'm high in this. And I agree with it. It makes sense. It checks out, right? This last part, and this is really, really useful too. It can be extremely difficult to transform creativity into money or into a career. So high levels of creativity are, furthermore, necessary for entrepreneurial success and often prove useful at the top of hierarchies, even in very conservative occupations such as banking, accounting, and law, which need creative people in leadership to provide new vision and direction. So I feel extremely fortunate and lucky that by the age of 27, I've found some type of work that allows me to be creative and rewards me greatly for my creativity. And that's going to be door-to-door direct sales, because you have to be adaptable. You have to have a high processing speed to get data from someone and then in real time process it and creatively construct a response to further along the longer goal, to have more vision. So all this stuff is man, it's important to know how open you are. If you do not know, figure it out. Because if you're below 20 in openness, that's not good. And I could use a sip of water. Talking a lot. 48 minutes straight. Yep. Oh yeah, hang on, interlude. What's this? He's got Sorry, I don't know why I acted like that. I'm just gonna pop a little Zimbabwe right here. A little upper decker action. I don't condone this nicotine use, but here I am condoning it on my own podcast. Oops. What else? Okay. So we've trucked along through 4 of the big 5. Let's wrap it up here. Let's put a bookend on this and talk about the 5th and final trait of the big 5, which is neuroticism. Neurotic. How neurotic are you? That's a real question. So neuroticism is basically your proclivity, how subject you are to negative emotion. It's how likely you are to identify with negativity, negative emotions, such as anger, anxiety, worry, fear, depression. If you're more neurotic, you're going to feel more of those sad boy traits. So, neuroticism is unique, and that's the only trait that's objectively bad. It doesn't really do you a whole lot of good to be more, I need to tread lightly because a context really matters. So, neuroticism fluctuates quite a bit. So, for example, my neuroticism in 2021 was a 22, which is relatively low, but in 3 years it dropped down to 16. So it went down quite a bit. So neuroticism is going to depend largely on your stage, your life stage. Teenagers are angsty. They're going to feel more neurotic because they don't know as much and they haven't developed a whole lot of conscientiousness, and they're kind of like, woe is me, I don't know what I'm doing, everything's uncertain. And there was a point in my life in 2021, man, so if I would have took this test in 2018, I bet my neuroticism would have probably been around 50. Because in 2018, I was confused, I felt anxious, I feared public speaking to my core. I was pretty daggone neurotic. And so now in 2024, I'm down to 16. That's pretty amazing. So your neuroticism can fluctuate based on I mean, obviously, if you experience, let's say, a death in your family, you're going to feel way more neurotic that year, right? Or if you go through trauma, or if you get fired, or something terrible happens that causes uncertainty, you will feel more neurotic, hands down. So, neuroticism breaks down into... It breaks down into withdrawal. So it's how much anticipatory anxiety you feel, and then it breaks down into volatility, which is how stable you are across time. If you're high in volatility, which is a subset of neuroticism, then you're going to be fluctuating. You're going to be up and down every single day. I mean, we all know somebody like that. They might show up to work and they're high energy, happy, bouncing off the walls, and the next day they're downtrodden, freaking in the corner crying, right? So people that are high in neuroticism are more unstable, and they identify with more negative emotion. So I am low in neuroticism, which is, I think I've always been low in neuroticism. I've always been able, since I was a child, to handle extreme, intense stimuli in a very calm, composed way. So I'm very composed. I'm very in the pocket. It takes a lot to rattle me up, to get me to feel angry. I know on the podcast sometimes I pretend to be angry and aggressive, but it's obviously for comedic entertainment, right? But in my life, so I'm low in neuroticism. There's a guy in high school who tried to fight me. We were at a festival, and he was I think he was upset that I was posting on Facebook about my cat. And because of some MySpace comment, I don't even know the dude. He basically was like, "Hey, I'm going to beat you up right here." And I was like, and this was in front of a big group, and I'm like, "Okay." And I think he asked me straight up, "If I hit you, are you going to hit back?" I said, "No." And he was like, "Okay." And that was it. The interaction ended. And I was like, frick that guy, who's he? Anyway, so I'm not going to get riled up. Now, replay back that scenario with someone who is very neurotic. They might go into fight or flight mode. They might, they might handle that situation very differently. I'll put it that way. So let's get into the scores. So I'm 16, I'm low. Uncle Greg, he's 44. He's about average. He's going to feel. He's more of a feeler. And in his stage of life, he might feel like he's not where he should be, perhaps. I mean, this is speculation. I love you, Uncle Greg. Clayjon, he's 67 in neuroticism. So he's higher in negative emotion. And it makes sense because Clayjon is much younger. I think he's 19. He's still a teenager. So his uncertainty, his susceptibility to fear and anxiety and worry is a little bit higher, understandably. And then Aji, she's 82. She's the highest on the board for neuroticism. And I got to deal with that. I'm just kidding. But no, so again, the fact that I'm really low in neuroticism and the fact that she's extremely high, or higher than average, rather, we're going to balance each other out. She is going to help me, and here's why her being high in it is good. It's because she is going to help me grow in my compassion. She's going to cause me to be more conscientious towards improving the quality of our emotional state. The fact that I'm low in neuroticism, I'm more of an anchor. I'm more even keel across time. I can be that backbone in our partnership, And when she's neurotic and she's feeling a lot, I appreciate that I can actually tap into that and feel with her and feel some of that. Because being low in neuroticism, I can kind of feel like I'm a robot. I mean, I used to feel like that a long time ago when I was in college. I felt very robotic and unfazed by the world, very underwhelmed. And so, these traits need to be taken into account, that they, what you're comparing that trait to. right? And also, AG, she is an ICU nurse. She's surrounded by death and sad families. And she has to have a big heart and care and adopt some of that negative emotion because her patients are dying. So it makes sense when you consider these other factors, right? And that's it, man. That's the podcast. How about that for a quality podcast? iPad, show notes, high quality video, straight into the microphone. And that's personality. So again, just to recap, we talked about personality. We talked about what it is. It's how you think, feel, and behave. We talked about the types of test. We talked about the Myers-Briggs. Sucks. We talked about the DISC. Sucks. We talked about the Enneagram. Pretty good. Pretty insightful. The Enneagram. And then we talked about the Big Five. And we went over the agreeableness, the extroversion, the conscientiousness, the openness, and the neuroticism. So again, down in the descripto, scroll down. I'll put the link for the test that I used, Jordan Peterson's Big Five test. It's $10. I'll put it down there in the description. And if you want to check out your Big Five, you can hit that link, take the test. It's like, only takes about 15-20 minutes to take. You want to take it in an environment where you're not overwhelmed with anxiety, or where you want to be in kind of a natural state of being when you take the test. So if your great uncle just passed away, don't take the test because your score is going to be skewed, right? So anyways, that's pod 17. Give me the keys. I'm sweating up a storm because it's hot in here and I worked out like a couple hours ago. So anyways, love you guys. I'll catch you on the next pod, baby.